Hello, and welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast, brought to you by the Malfers Group team, where each week we tackle important, actionable topics to help churches thrive. And now, here's your hosts, Scott Ball and AJ Matthew.
Welcome to episode 15 of the Church Revitalization Podcast. On this week's episode, AJ and I share 5 of the best ways you can show your team of volunteers and staff how much you appreciate them. Every thriving ministry relies upon a team of volunteers and leaders that share the ministry load together. Letting your team know that you notice and appreciate their faithfulness and contribution to the ministry is a critical component of preventing burnout. In this week's episode, we provide 5 ways, some of them outside of the box, to show your team some love and keep them encouraged and engaged for the long haul. To read today's show notes, visit malfersgroup.com/15, the number 15. If you like today's episode, please subscribe and share with your friends in ministry. Now, let's dive in.
All right, this week we are talking about ways to thank your team. Specifically, I suppose, we've got 5, so we'll call it the 5 ways to thank your team. Everybody needs to feel appreciated and they know that they're doing well. We're not going to turn this into like evaluation or anything like that. This is really just more simple ways that you can make people understand that the role that they're playing in your ministry is valued and that they're valued as a person. So this is a little more of a fun topic, I suppose, Scott, isn't it?
It's Thanksgiving week. So yeah, of course, you might not be listening to this in sequence. Just so you know, if you're listening to this later, we released this on the week of Thanksgiving in 2019. Yeah, it's so important to be thankful for your team, AJ. I know from my own experience and on working on staffs that it's just so easy to get into the grind and the week to week, just needing to get things done. And part of it's my personality. Like I lean towards the D type on disc. And it's not always like the natural thing to me to want to pull someone aside and be like, hey, thank you. That requires effort and intentionality, and that it doesn't come naturally to me. So this is for all of those guys and gals out there, leaders like me, who it's not because we're jerks. It just doesn't cross our minds to say it.
Okay, so there's a level of emotional intelligence, an emotional maturity that we have to achieve or be aware of.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, because I'm totally with you on that either. This wouldn't maybe come naturally to me all the time.
Right. So we want to give you some practical ways to do that. And AJ, you've put together this article on these 5 things, but we also want to talk through them and kind of discuss the nuances of them. So without ado, since this is Thanksgiving week and people might have limited time, so let's dive straight in. AJ, number 1 you've got listed here is let them do what they love. What do you mean by that, and how is that a way to thank them?
Yeah, so I guess maybe a little bit more background is required for this one. It's not quite as simple as giving them a Starbucks card, but letting them do what they love. This is getting the right people in the right place. Letting them serve in their giftedness and their passion. That in and of itself is a way of thanking them, because think of the joy that you've ever felt if you were able to do the right thing at the right time. And, one of those things where like, hey, if you love what you do, it's never a job. Life doesn't work like that all the time.
But it's philosophically true. Like you don't hate it.
You don't hate it. At least not every day. Most of the time, you don't hate it. So yeah, helping them to function in a role that fits them best and how God has designed them, their divine design, if you will, is a way of saying thank you. And Scott, you mentioned a point on this earlier that kind of ties in with this before we were on air. And that is that if there's a season in which somebody on the team has to do something maybe additional outside of their gifting or just, carry a load, that be a season, only a season, that they know this is not permanent. And so that it's a tie into this of a way of thanking them like, hey, I appreciate that you're doing this. I know this is outside of what you're supposed to be doing, but just know this is a temporary thing. And we do appreciate you taking this burden during this time.
Yeah. So when we're working with churches through the leadership pipeline design process, one of the things that comes up all the time is, what do we do with folks who are serving in multiple areas? And, my response to that is always let people serve in 2 areas. One area where they're serving in a really low level, low responsibility capacity, something like a greeter where they just got to show up and say hi to folks. And then one place where they are serving maybe they're actually leading other people. They're leading a small group. They're teaching in children's ministry. They're up on the stage leading worship. They're leading others. And so if you've got volunteers who are serving in 3 or 4 or 5 different things, scaling them back to just 2, one that's really low commitment and then one that's maybe more aligned with their giftedness, where they're leading others, that's a great way to thank them and just take that load off their plate and get them serving in a way that aligns with who they are. And as you said, AJ, that idea of carry for now is really good for staff. So if you're, a growing church in particular, and you've got a smaller staff because your income, your revenue as a church has not increased yet, even though the church is growing, you're going to have staff that are carrying a lot of burdens over the long term they shouldn't carry. So yeah, put that in a carry for now category on their job description. That can really show them that you love them. Which leads to the number 2 thing you have on the list, which is this idea of growing the team, AJ, and giving people time off. So obviously, you could thank staff by giving them paid time off, but what does that mean for volunteers?
Yeah, that's not really what I meant by that topic, although that, like you say, is really good. And of course, what we just talked about in point 1, maybe you just need to grow your team. People are overworked and they're doing too much and you've got to add staff. That could be the case. Growing your team is going to be a great idea. From a volunteer perspective, I think back to an instance at my church from a few years ago. We had an amazing couple leading a particular area of children's ministry. Everybody knew them. They were amazing. They knew every kid's name. They memorized it and they knew them as they aged. I mean, when my kid, 3 years later, they would see him in the hall and they're like, "Hey, Alex, how are you?" They were fantastic, but they worked every single Sunday. They were doing what they loved and they weren't taken advantage of, but people weren't recognizing that they don't need to be there every single Sunday. And so had we been able to grow the volunteer team, and so that maybe everybody's working every other Sunday or 2 Sundays a month, however the calendar works out, maybe they wouldn't have kind of burned out and really felt like, hey, we've got to step away from this.
Oh, so they burned out. Did they step down from serving?
They burned out and they stepped away. And it was, it was a loss. It was a loss for the ministry, a loss for the church, loss for the kids. And so growing your team, especially, in the vein of volunteers, building up a volunteer team that allows people to not become burned out is a great way to thank them and show that you appreciate them, that you're not just going to let them go and go and go until they can't go anymore.
Yeah, that's so good. All right, number 3, this maybe should have been number 1 because it's the most obvious thing here, but recognizing your volunteers and your staff and thanking them for something specific.
Yeah. I mean, isn't it great when you can just kind of catch somebody? We as parents do this with our kids. You catch them doing something that maybe it's actually out of character. Like, oh my gosh, that was actually really nice of them. They don't do that very often. Hopefully that's not your team. But, just when these things get back to you, if you're, like senior pastor or a upper level church leader listening to this, these things get back to you. Somebody maybe that went above and beyond, or it was just, they really took care of something that they didn't have to, but they did. Those are such great opportunities to go have a personal conversation, handshake, pat on the back with somebody. They didn't do it for attention. They didn't do it to get the thank you, but when they get it, it just really, warms their heart and it's going to they're probably going to be lifted up for that day and maybe that week even. So have your ear to the ground for those things. As leaders, we should be aware of our team. We should be desiring to know what's happening, in those lower ranks, if you will, especially in a larger organization. Don't always just be in your office and only talking with those next few leaders that maybe report directly to you. Know your team, know what's going on, because it gives you those great opportunities to be out there and, just being with them and making sure that they know that they're appreciated and even that that they're there. There's going to be cases you're like, wow, does he even know I exist? Does he know my name?
And writing them down, like an email is nice, a text is nice, all those things are nice. Saying something in the hallway at church or whatever, all of those are good and you should sprinkle those in. But if you write a note and put it in the actual mail, man, like when's the last time you got a note? I can't think of AJ. AJ, when's the last time you sent me a thank you note?
Okay, on the spot.
I think that would be never. I'm just
note
saying.
To self, buy some note cards.
But, I don't care about that. But I am just saying, like, if you were a volunteer and you got that in the mail from a leader in your church, you probably wouldn't throw that one in the trash.
I mean, it's 2019. Who does that? Nobody does that anymore. that person was thinking about you. You know the intentionality that it took to do that. It would be special. It really would.
It literally is the simplest way to thank somebody, but the one that you're least likely to do on this list.
True. Probably true.
Burned. No, I'm serious. No, but seriously, you guys can do that. All right, number four. And this kind of ties in with what you were talking about, AJ, about having your ear to the ground, but thanking them by creating a culture of open communication with leadership. What does that look like?
Yeah. So, imagine the work environment, and some of you have been there, or maybe you're in it right now, that you just removed. You feel like you're removed from decision making. You feel like you're removed from maybe vision and ideas and all this stuff. I mean, if you're in more of a team environment in which you know that you could grab that leader when you're past each other in the hall, you could say, "Hey, you know what? Let me ask you about this or that," or "Hey, you know what? I had an idea," and they'll take the time and listen to you. You could say, "Hey, I'm having trouble with this," or "Would you mind kind of off the record? We could talk for a minute about this situation that I've found myself into. I sure would like your counsel on that." These are the kinds of things that in some environments that doesn't work. That's not open and available. And so we're talking about really improving a work environment, improving a team environment by having this be the culture of your team. So I think that's a great way of making sure, maybe this is not necessarily a thank you as in, like, "Hey, thanks for this." This is more of a healthy environment in which people will feel appreciated all the time in their position.
Yeah. One of the things that we work on when we deal with a leadership pipeline, AJ, is limiting the number of people that any one person directly oversees. So, for example, if you are the children's pastor, most children's pastors I know are overseeing a team of 30, 40, 50, 100 volunteers. I mean, they just have these massive teams, and they are directly responsible for all of those people. And the challenge with that, AJ, is that, on one hand, you go, "Oh, all of these people have, an open line of communication to the person running the ministry," which sounds good. But if 100 people have that kind of access to you, how much access do you really have? Not much, because your attention is spread so thin. So, by creating a more sustainable structure and giving a person that only has 8 people that they're overseeing, you're actually giving them a more accessible line of communication. But even when you go to a model like that, AJ, we talk about in the pipeline process this idea of skip level communication. So even if I'm not directly overseeing 100 volunteers, I need to, as you said before, keep my ear to the ground and know what's going on in those children's ministries classrooms and what's happening with those frontline volunteers. So if there's a challenge, I can address it and not have to wait till it gets back to me, a month later or 6 months later, that there are issues in a particular ministry. And so it's a tough thing to manage, but as your church grows, these are the kinds of things you have to deal with.
Yep, absolutely. And we don't want to get too deep into turning this into a effective staff management podcast, but that's great. And really, most of this list is more culture focused, more ongoing appreciation methods in your team culture. So yeah, okay, cool, man.
Last one here on the list. So let's recap before we get to number 5. So let them do what they love. So getting people in the right, sort of on the right seat on the bus, shows them that you care about them. Number 2, growing your team so that you have a good, healthy rotation with volunteers so that people don't burn out. That is a way to show them that you care. Number 3 was to actually thank them for something specific, and double points if you write it and mail it.
Yeah.
Number 4, create a culture of open communication with your leadership. So even just having a structure where that's possible, but also just making sure people understand that your door is open and that you're listening to them, that can be really valuable. Now we're on to number 5. AJ, tell me a little bit about a volunteer appreciation night. What would that look like? And would that just be a lot of work?
This could be a lot of work, but you know what? Take that one night a year just to bring everybody together that serves selflessly all year and make it a fun evening. Spend the money on a decent catered dinner or at a really cool venue and celebrate. I mean, take the time to celebrate. Typically, you'd find this at the end of the year, and don't just have it like, "Hey, thanks for coming. Enjoy your dinner. Good night." This is the time when you could have some fun awards or something, or recognize some really special stories that happen throughout the year. Maybe, hey, keep a collection of those personal notes that you sent for those kind of special things that happened. And maybe then you could re-recognize those folks when other people can maybe hear what had happened, if it's appropriate but these are just some ideas, just take the time to show people in a group setting, that the ministry was better off for them this year, and that you appreciate the work that they put in.
Yeah, I've seen churches that like really do it up like an awards night, almost like pretend like it's Oscars or whatever, and have people like really dress up, and they get a red carpet and kind of play up that theme of some sort of like a film awards, Oscars or something. It's just fun. I love that idea of doing something fun. We talked about a couple episodes ago, AJ, should churches just do things for fun? This is one of those instances where you could do something that is fun, but it would have a point. Like it's a fun thing you're doing, but it's not just for fun. You're actually showing appreciation to your volunteers, and it's fun.
Yeah. Of course, if the women for that formal night feel like they've got to go out and buy a $300 dress, and the guy's like, I got to rent a tux for this thing. Maybe you're not showing them the appreciation you think you are.
Well, maybe they don't have to dress up, but like maybe like you, the pastor, could rent a tux.
Okay, yeah.
You play it up. Who are you wearing today? I'm wearing Target.
So, I hope you guys are having a great Thanksgiving week. If you're listening to this on Thanksgiving week, let me take this time just to tell you, Scott, how much I do appreciate you. So thanks for all the work you put in. You folks listening to this don't know all the behind the scenes work that Scott puts in, editing and producing this podcast. So Scott, thank you for doing that.
That would have meant more if you wrote it in a note, though.
You're right. I'll do that later. I don't have note cards. But man, you're a great ministry partner. And all of our team here, Dr. Malfers and Ron Danini, our CEO, and everybody that goes into making our ministry work day in, day out. I am thankful for all of you, and love the ministry that we get to do together. And so, hey, this is an opportunity, Thanksgiving week, to make those appreciations and recognitions.
Yeah, and I thank you too, AJ. Really, I do appreciate that kind words, and I appreciate everything that you're doing. And listeners, we appreciate you. We wouldn't be doing what we do if it weren't for you. So we love you, and we say it every week. We love you, and that probably sounds weird, like you don't know me, you don't know, but we do. We hear from you, and we get to know you through a variety of different means, and we really do care about you and your ministry. And so we really appreciate you, and we care about you, and we're here for you. So thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Church Revitalization Podcast. This is episode 15. So to read AJ's article on 5 ways to thank your team, top 5 ways to thank your team, go to malfersgroup.com/15, the number 15. And you can check that out. Appreciate you subscribing, leaving a review, sharing this with your friends in ministry. And we'll talk to you next time.